This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, April 21st. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at our VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. A World Health Organization official warns Tuesday that if countries are too quick to relax coronavirus lockdown measures, they risk a resurgence of the coronavirus. Dr. Takeshi Kasai, the WHO Regional Director for the Western Pacific, said during an online conference, quote, "This is not the time to be lax. Instead, we need to ready ourselves for a new way of living for the foreseeable future." His cautionary message comes as governments worldwide consider when and how to relax COVID-19 stay-at-home restrictions to stop the spread of the deadly virus. Through an executive order, U.S. President Donald Trump says he is temporarily suspending all immigration into America in response to the coronavirus outbreak and to protect jobs. Millions of Americans have been laid off as companies trim payroll during the COVID-19 crisis. The World Food Program says the number of people facing acute food insecurity could nearly double this year to 265 million due to the economic fallout of COVID-19. The impact of lost tourism revenues, falling remittances and other restrictions linked to the coronavirus pandemic may leave some 130 million people in dire need of food, adding to 135 million already in that category. The coronavirus is potentially catastrophic for millions who are already hanging by a thread, according to Arif Hussein, WHO chief economist. In Southern Africa, people living with HIV/AIDS in Zimbabwe are having trouble accessing their medication as the country extends its COVID-19 lockdown for 2 more weeks. Mariama Diallo has our report.
Daniso Fury and her husband, who are HIV positive, said because of stay-at-home orders imposed by Zimbabwe's government, they are finding it challenging to refill their much-needed prescriptions.
It's difficult because there's no transport to go and collect our medication. Some of my colleagues, they do not take it within the community where they stay. They travel a short distance from the community where they usually stay.
She says they are among those at high risk of complications if they were to contract the coronavirus.
Because our immune system is down. So we are at risk, high risk to be affected with this COVID-19.
For most people, the new coronavirus causes mild or moderate symptoms such as fever and cough. For some, especially older adults and people with existing health problems, it can cause more severe illness, including pneumonia, and could lead to death. Fury says she can't afford to miss taking her meds, not even for 1 day.
This one is medication. Tell them eat. Na 8 o'clock every day, Monday, for life. I don't miss any day.
According to UNAIDS, Zimbabwe has one of the highest HIV prevalence rates in sub-Saharan Africa at 12.7%, with 1.3 million people living with HIV in 2018. There has been progress because that same year, there were 38,000 new HIV infections, down from 62,000 in 2010. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
In Sudan, Khartoum is currently under a 3-week coronavirus lockdown that began last Saturday. The East African country has more than 90 confirmed coronavirus infections and at least 12 deaths. Sudan's frontline medical professionals are doing their best to prevent the virus from spreading further, despite a healthcare system tattered by decades of civil war and sanctions. Naba Muhyiddin brings us their stories told in their own words.
We're so happy in the center because we have 6 recovered cases of COVID-19. Despite our low resources, we have 6 fully recovered cases. We ask people to stay home in the coming period and obey the laws. My message is not only for Sudanese, it's for everyone to respect the laws and policies and stop gatherings so we can all pass this period of time with the fewest possible losses.
Today we received news confirming the increase in cases to double the number, 100% increase. We were also notified that we'll receive new positive cases in the isolation centre that are asymptomatic. That caused us a great deal of confusion because that will change our policies in the centre. With this increase in the cases, we need to prepare new isolation and detention centres proportionate to the increase. We also need to provide the PPE tools for medical staff in the hospitals and isolation and detention centres. All of that requires great efforts from all actors in the health sector.
Days before the holy month of Ramadan begins, the Islamic world is grappling with an untimely paradox and forced separation at a time when socializing is almost sacred. Libby Hogan explains.
The Islamic holiday of Ramadan is usually marked by families gathering, sharing prayers, and then feasts after breaking the fast. But this year, the holiest month will be one of enforced separation. Jihan Salama and her family in Cairo are preparing to celebrate indoors.
Now, unfortunately, doors remain closed. If this continues, this will certainly be the worst Ramadan to have passed the Islamic world and all Muslims.
In Cairo's street markets, lines of traditional lanterns gather dust on the shelves. Few customers see any point in buying them. There are nighttime curfews, mosques are shut, and communal prayers are banned. And in Indonesia, vendors watch on, faced with the reality that this year, around the world, 1.8 billion Muslims are facing a Ramadan like never before. In Jerusalem's Old Town, lights are being draped along the streets, but the once bustling souks are now eerily quiet. As the call to prayer sounds in Saudi Arabia's capital, Dr. Abdul Aziz Al-Zir's family head is adapting to limited Ramadan rituals and praying in their home rather than in the mosque.
I've made a place to pray in my house. I gathered my sons and arranged with them a place for us to pray so we can all pray together.
Despite the dampened mood, live-streamed sermons and online meetings are just some of the new ways of meeting to fill the void of families congregating and sharing meals during festivities spent at a distance.
That was Reuters' Libby Hogan reporting. As the global COVID-19 pandemic challenges both scientists and patients, experts say communities play an important role in flattening the curve of the outbreak. However, mistrust by communities can be a major impediment. In part 2 of Linor Mudu's interview with Melinda Gates, co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they discussed the issue of community trust.
Mrs. Gates, we saw during the Ebola outbreak that community trust, and it's not just with the Ebola outbreak, in general, community trust is such a big part of tackling outbreaks such as this one. There have been information out there, whether they're true or not, that are leading people to feel some mistrust. How do we build the trust at this stage when we hear so much information out there, whether it's about access to protective gears, whether it's about vaccine coming up?
My message is listen to the medical professionals and listen to the scientists. They are the ones to go to. They know what's going on. When your child is sick, you don't take them to your politician. You take them to the doctor. You learn the best science. So go to the credible websites. If I was in Africa, I would go to the Africa CDC website. They have the real information. And then spread that to your neighbors. This is a time we have to come together with unity. We saw it happen during the Ebola epidemic that happened. And we saw that communities at first were, they said, oh my gosh, we have to distance ourselves from the funerals and not do the touching of the bodies. But once they learned that that was a transmission of the disease and that factual information was true, They did the right things and they helped tamp down Ebola in their communities. So we have to listen to the true experts during a pandemic like this.
Sometimes information doesn't trickle down to communities as much as they should, and the mistrust even is sometimes towards the government, towards leaders. How can leaders do a better job at informing their population so that they don't feel like there are some information that are being hidden, something is not very clear, or something is very suspicious? How can leaders do a better job?
I think leaders can put the experts forward and let them take the microphone, let them take the interviews, let them share the right information. So that is often a scientist or a medical professional. Those are the people to trust. You see it in the United States with Dr. Fauci really speaking out, and people understand that he's been in his job since 1984. He knows what he's talking about. He has seen epidemics before. He knows disease. Those are the types of people to listen to. And so in Africa, again, it's the scientists, it's the African CDC. Those are the medical experts who can tell us how to keep ourselves and our families and our communities safe.
When we think about what's happening in 2015, your husband, Bill Gates, delivered a TED Talk where he really warned people of the greatest threat that was coming up, which will be an infectious virus. Highly infectious virus. Now, what has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation done in terms of encouraging the world to prepare?
Well, after that TED Talk that Bill did in 2015, we worked with the G7 and to really talk about the Ebola pandemic that had happened, and then to set up something called the Center for Epidemic Preparedness. It's called CEPI, to start to have a place where we could bring together the science of the world to prepare for an epidemic. Unfortunately, not very many leaders took up that rallying call. One of them who did, though, was Chancellor Merkel in Germany. She took it very seriously. And not much later, after she had led the G7, then we set up this CEPI organization. But to be honest, it was not well funded by governments around the world. And if it had been, we wouldn't be in such a terrible place right now in terms of understanding this disease and potentially having some more solutions.
Are we going to see a trend in the future? What do experts tell us in terms of this COVID-19 and what we should expect?
Well, I think we always need to be prepared as a world, that there are going to be other infections coming, other viruses, and we have to plan for them. Just like we plan now for natural disasters, for an earthquake or for a fire, we actually have to run drills and scenarios of, okay, if we see disease outbreaks somewhere in the world, what do you do to immediately alert all governments, all centers for disease control, start to collect the right data by gender, by type of population, so the world can respond very quickly instead of in this more slow, sort of haphazard way that you're seeing this sort of patchwork quilt that's going on around the world.
That was Africa 54 health correspondent Linomu Du speaking with Melinda Gates, co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. British actor and filmmaker Idris Elba launched a new United Nations fund Monday to help farmers in poorer nations and to call on wealthier economies to provide aid to prevent needless hunger and suffering due to the coronavirus pandemic. Elba and his wife gave their support to a fund set up by the International Fund for Agricultural Development to help stop economic shocks caused by COVID-19, triggering a global food crisis. IFAD says it will contribute $40 million into the new fund to counter the effects of the pandemic on food production, market access, and employment in developing countries. It also aims to raise at least $200 million more from governments, foundations, and the private sector. In eastern Senegal, where a curfew and market closures make it hard to sell produce or livestock, the agency is supporting cash transfers and subsidies via smartphones and distributing seeds and fertilizers ahead of the planting season. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, one of the major African airlines stares at folding its wings and rendering thousands jobless. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to Africa 54. A professor at New York University is calling on social scientists worldwide to participate in an effort that could help medical experts and world leaders to better predict the spread of the coronavirus and how to better control the outbreak. Bronwyn Benito has more.
With information collected from around the world on how people are protecting themselves from the virus, a New York University professor says their study may be useful for predicting behavior in the face of health warnings.
What we wanted to do was get as many collaborators as we could around the world who are willing to collect representative samples. We wanted to see what predicts whether or not people are going to be engaging in social distancing, washing their hands, or also sharing high-quality information as opposed to conspiracy theories.
The findings could help decision makers in the struggle to protect people during a quarantine while still trying to keep economies from collapsing, says Professor Jay Van Bavel.
Our goal is to work as a complement to those medical health experts and give them the tools that they can use to communicate their messages more powerfully. We're not questioning or challenging them for 1 second. We're simply using what we can bring to the table to help them.
This digital open source approach is unusual, he said. Scientists worldwide have been invited to collaborate in a crowdsourced Google Doc. In the first 24 hours, more than 50 research teams volunteered.
What we're trying to do is use cooperation and get past some of the self-interest that normally dominate science, where everybody's fighting for credit and racing to get their study done first.
This research builds upon a study by Van Bavel and his collaborators that was accepted for publishing in the journal Nature. But rather than engaging only scientists from wealthy countries, the new study aims to reach a maximum number of collaborators, and well-funded contributors could help those who are less so.
We don't need to get 10,000 people in the US and meanwhile no people in other countries. What we want them to do is fund data collection in other countries around the world where we have people on the ground there who can do the translations and get the data.
The results of the research will be made public the same way it was collected.
We are going to publish the data openly in a journal so that people who weren't involved with our project can immediately use it and start analyzing it and sharing it with other folks in other fields or with members of their government or members of their public where it's relevant.
Out of the darkness of this pandemic, better academic approaches and solutions are likely to emerge to help future crises, he said. Bronwyn Benito and Kathleen Struck for VOA News.
Italy appears to be inching towards the end of its COVID-19 lockdown, but with more than 23,000 deaths due to the virus, what the next phase is going to look like remains unclear and uncertain. The Italian government has begun to allow some businesses to reopen, but as Sabina Castelfranco reports, it's not turning out to be a smooth return to normal.
For weeks, the only people outside were those patiently waiting to go and buy groceries and fresh vegetables, like at this market. Other than that, the eternal city belonged to the empty buses, people walking their dogs, and police checking drivers. Yet bars, hotels, even the normally very busy Vatican museums are still closed. Gas stations are only self-service. But gradually, Italy, fearful and impatient, is heading towards a return to normal life. Timidly, certain types of businesses are reopening, like this large stationery store in central Rome. Preparations are underway to ensure the safety of customers and employees. Everyone here is pleased to be back at work.
We are very happy because we're resuming a little normalcy. We're trying. We trust in our customers and are here waiting for them.
Outside an office equipment store, Antonio says life must go on as people cannot all stay indoors forever.
Some essential services must open, otherwise everything stops. Obviously, with all the precautions, masks, gloves and social distancing, which people are doing, so things are tranquil.
Emanuela says it was tough to close her small business, a shop that sells children's clothing.
It's kind of a surreal feeling because there are few people around, but we have to start up again, sooner or later.
With spring in the air, it's like a renaissance for Romans. Many have started dreaming of heading to the beaches, but in spite of the good weather, those dreams for the moment are still out of bounds. In spite of the eased restrictions on some shops, Italy remains on lockdown. And here in Rome, streets and piazzas remain deserted. Italians are wary about phase 2 and the gradual reopening of businesses. They are only too aware that the number of deaths and new infections remains high. Sabina Castelfranco, VOA News, Rome.
From alien invasions and climate catastrophes to pandemics, Hollywood has made countless disaster movies over the years. During this real-life pandemic, VOA's Elizabeth Lee talks about how fictional Hollywood films and reality these days are starting to blur.
Many people associate Los Angeles with Hollywood. Ever since the lockdown, it seems like I've been living in a post-apocalyptic Hollywood movie. In many of the films, the plot line is the same. They first show people living normal everyday lives, and then disaster hits, and the world becomes almost unrecognizable. That's the world I live in. There are very few cars on the road. The schools are closed. Many parents of elementary-aged children, including myself, have been trying to find a new normal in an anything but normal world. The challenge has been to work, keep our children learning and entertained indoors. For us, it's been baking a cake or two, and in true Hollywood fashion, creating backdrops and scenery and making a mini movie with toys and a phone. Outside the home, the world seems surreal. Los Angeles is a car city, but these days there are fewer cars on the road, so travel time has been cut by more than half. On the sidewalk, I see people either jogging or walking their dog. Some people practice social distancing, but not everyone. It's a game of chicken where I would walk towards someone walking toward me to see who will cross the street first. So these days, after work and homeschool, we stay home. Exercising consists of doing virtual classes on the web. In many of the movies, people do survive a disaster, but the world changes. In this real-life pandemic, what the world will look like at the end of it is still yet to be seen, but one thing is certain. The children living during this time will remember the pandemic of 2020. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Los Angeles.
With a wider world off limits to those practicing physical distancing, new bonds are forming closer to home. In communities worldwide, neighbors are now doing curious things like hunting teddy bears and joining in evening rituals to honor frontline workers. Matt Dibble looks at one community in Oakland, California.
For more than a month, Californians have been asked to remain at home, with only rare and local outside trips permitted. Many neighbors are reaching out to each other with creativity and compassion.
Oh, and there's a bear here, too.
For parents confined with young children, the daily walk is liberating.
Where's the bear? There it is.
In this Oakland neighborhood, furry faces reward sharp eyes, like those of Brendan Moriarty and his daughter Eloise.
Where is it? Where is it?
there are bears everywhere and windows, and it's fun looking for them, right? Do you like looking for bears? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Emmy Hoffmeister and her daughter Ivy are also joining in.
I saw people that were posting pictures of their bears in their windows, and I realized that it was a thing. That night we put a bear in our window and we went and looked around the neighborhood to see how many bears we could find. How many bears have you found, Ivy?
10.
So-called teddy bear hunts have sprung up in many other cities too, to entertain and reassure those who might find the world a little scary right now.
Ivy, when you see the bears in the windows, how does it make you feel?
Happy.
In cities, many now have a nightly salute to healthcare workers. Bernie Bernstein brought it to her block.
I just love the idea. So I put it out to the block and I said, hey, I'm going to be out at 8 p.m. if anybody wants to join me. It caught on quickly and started spreading in both directions. Some of us are getting to know our neighbors more.
The salute reached the ears of a healthcare worker living on the block.
He heard us from the beginning and was just really touched. Thanked us and said, I love you guys.
This is one community among many where strengthened bonds seem certain to outlast the pandemic. Matt Dibble for VOA News, Oakland, California.
South Africa's struggling state-owned airline is offering severance packages to its 5,000-member workforce after Pretoria said it would no longer fund rescue efforts. Shara Lee has our story.
Talks between trade unions and South African Airways resumed on Monday after the struggling state-owned airline offered severance packages to its 5,000-strong workforce. That proposal put to unions last week by SAA's administrators is the latest sign that the long-struggling carrier is on the brink of collapse. It follows the government's decision last week that it will no longer provide more funds for rescue efforts. SAA has not turned a profit since 2011 and has received bailouts of more than 20 billion rand, or over $1 billion, in the past 3 years. In December, it went into a form of bankruptcy protection. Since then, it's had to suspend all commercial passenger flights amid global lockdowns. According to the proposal, workers would see their employment terminated by mutual agreement on April the 30th, and part of their compensation would be 1 week's pay for every year of service. The proposal says that in order to pay the severance packages, quote, the company is required to sell and dispose of its assets.
That was Shara Lee of Reuters reporting. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.